Morning, Pa. All right, here we are, Chapter 8, Lehi's Tabernacle in the Wilderness. Just as the beginning of Lehi's exodus echoed that of the original exodus, events during his family's travels to their promised land similarly point back to the biblical narrative of the Israelites traveling to reach theirs. This chapter will reconstruct portions of the Lost Book of Mormon text pertaining to three such echoes of the Mosaic Exodus in the Lehi story: Lehi's construction of a tabernacle, Lehi and Nephi's acquisition, use, and preservation of instruments paralleling the miraculous instruments that facilitated the biblical Exodus, and their 8 years wandering in the wilderness. Lehi's tabernacle. After returning to his father with the brass plates, Nephi says that Lehi began searching this set of scriptures and learned that they contained not only the book of Moses and records of the Israelite kings, but that they also contained the prophecies of the holy prophets, from the beginning even down to the commencement of the reign of Zedekiah, and also many prophecies which have been spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah. That's 1 Nephi 5:13. And he emphasizes, and also many prophecies which have been spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah. These prophecies of Jeremiah would have surely included this condemnation of the temple a decade or two earlier, when both called out. Let me reread that. These prophecies of Jeremiah would have surely included his condemnation of the temple a decade or two earlier, when he both called out the temple priests for failing their obligations to the oppressed and prophesied of the temple's destruction. Quote, "Trust ye not in lying words, saying, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these. Behold, ye trust in lying words that cannot profit. Ye will steal, murder, and commit adultery, and swear falsely, and burn incense unto Baal, and walk after other gods whom ye know not, and come and stand before me in this house, which is called by my name, and say, we are delivered to do all those abominations? Is this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? Behold, even I have seen it, saith the Lord. And now, because ye have done all these works, saith the Lord, and I spake unto you, rising up early and speaking, but ye heard not, and I called you, but ye answered not. Therefore will I do unto this house, which is called by my name, wherein ye trust, and unto the place which I gave unto you, and to your fathers, as I have done to Shiloh. Therefore pray not thou for this people, neither lift up cry nor prayer for them, neither make intercession to me, for I will not hear thee." That's Jeremiah 7:4-16. And his footnote is, many of these words should be familiar to readers, since they are quoted by Jesus during his ministry, when he similarly condemns the temple and prophesies of its destruction by quoting Jeremiah. It would have been clear to those who heard him that it was not the money changers but the temple priests who were under condemnation. Thus, when the scribes and chief priests heard it, they sought how they might destroy him. That's Mark 11:15-18. This reminder of the temple's corruption and prophesied destruction, combined with Lehi's own knowledge of Jerusalem's pending destruction, may have been what initiated an event reported by Fayette Lapham's account that is not clearly mentioned in Nephite's small plates. According to Lapham, after Nephi obtained Laban's record and returned to his father, quote, "The family then moved on for several days, when they were directed to stop and get materials to make brass plates upon which to keep a record of their journey, and also to erect a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire whenever they became bewildered or at a loss what to do. After all things were ready, they started on their journey in earnest. A gold ball went before them, having 2 pointers, one pointing steadily the way they should go, the other the way they could get provisions and other necessities." That's interesting. And the footnote for that is, we get that from Lapham's interview with the father of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, 40 years ago, his account of the finding of the sacred plates. Comparing this with Nephi's small plates account, it becomes clear that Lapham garbled some of what he heard. Yet, even where Lapham had misinterpreted the details he gives are with one exception: known elements of the Lehi narrative, elements of retrieving the brass plates, acquiring gold for Nephi's own record, and discovering the Liahona, are swapped around, but the construction of a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire is a unique detail, and not merely a combination or facile misreading of the elements of that narrative. Like Lapham's mention of the great feast at which Laban got drunk, discussed in chapter 7, the tabernacle detail adds an important interpretive key to understanding other aspects of the Book of Mormon text. Ooh, this is getting good. Internal evidence for Lehi's tabernacle. Evidence dovetailing with Lapham's report that Lehi constructed. Also, for me, the one spindle pointing the direction they should go and one pointing to where provisions and other things are. That's cool. I've always heard of way different things about how those spindles works. I've never really quite understood exactly the description on how it worked. I know for some people it's just like a ball that it is like a compass, and it just has 2 needles on it. And then there's other people that I've posited the idea that they were like pointing sticks that you rolled and then tossed, kind of like throwing bones, but I never understood that one. But the spindle idea of that like a compass, one's pointing the direction they should go, one gives them provisions. It's interesting. The specifics of it, of how it looks and how it acts, I've never understood really. So, internal evidence for Lehi's tabernacle. Evidence dovetailing with Lapham's report that Lehi constructed a tabernacle can be found in the report by Book of Mormon prophets that they tried scrupulously to observe the law of Moses, which required a sanctuary for the fulfillment of its ritual observances. That's, you can see 2 Nephi 5:10, chapter 25, verse 24, Jacob 4:5, Mosiah 13:27, Alma 25:15, 3 Nephi 1:24 through 25. During his exodus, Lehi could not meet this requirement with a settled temple, but he could meet it by creating a portable temple like Moses' wilderness sanctuary, the tabernacle. Given the way that Lehi's exodus is patterned on the biblical exodus, his building of a tabernacle also seems a natural fit. It further continues another pattern in the narrative of Lehi and Nephi, their construction of a new commonwealth of Israel. Almost immediately on arriving in the wilderness, Lehi built an altar he could use in place of sacrificing in the Jerusalem temple. Building a tabernacle during their exodus would go still further in the same direction, that of building parallel institutions to substitute for the Israelite national institutions they had abandoned. Though, of course, any makeshift tabernacle Lehi's family could have constructed on their journey would be small and meager compared to the elaborate biblical temple. That the band of travelers would feel authorized and even obligated to construct a replacement for the temple in Jerusalem is made clear by Nephi building a temple modeled on and functionally replacing Solomon's in the Promised Land. See 2 Nephi 5:16. For the same reason, it would make sense that they would build a tabernacle to accompany their altar and enable the Lehites to live the Mosaic law more scrupulously until they could construct a permanent temple after reaching their destination. 1 Nephi 4:15, 2 Nephi 5:10. Footnote says, potentially dovetailing with the descriptions of Lehi's family, constructing progressively more elaborate places of worship on their journey, archaeologist F. Richard Hawk has explored the remains of a small Solomon's temple-like sanctuary at Kohar Kerfut in Oman, a candidate for the Book of Mormon's Bountiful. A very, very good candidate for the Bountiful, actually. Scott Proctor and Maureen Proctor Archaeological Dig was there a whole place of worship at Nephi's Bountiful. If if I remember right, that's like right at the peninsula of Oman, um, right along kind of the middle part of its shoreline. If they wandered near the Red Sea and then went up the coastline, there's all sorts of deserty, cliffy stuff. But then there's these really green places right at this one area where you have cliffs of the sea, you have trees, you have animals, you've got bees, you've got everything that they describe. And it's all there. Like, when it comes to archaeology that backs up the Book of Mormon, the idea of Lehi's travel from there to Oman is like set. Even Hugh Nibley is like, yeah, this is it. In fact, the part where Ishmael dies, oh God, was it called Nahum? So there was this trail, there was this spice trail that they were kind of following along. And Nahum, I think, if I remember right, is where they Ishmael. God, I need to go back to get the right names. But you remember how it was the father of the girls that Nephi and his brothers went to go marry. And I think it was Ishmael, but no, that was his manservant. I can't remember. Dang it. Anyways, one of the fathers dies. The fathers of the girls that Nephi and Lehi went to go and get for their marriage and for their children. So that father dies as they were traveling toward the sea to then be taken over to the Americas. The place that he dies, I think, is called Nahum. And they have found that there is a grave that specifically is to that name. I think it's Ishmael, if I remember right. But that means that, is it the person? Well, I would think so. But everything fits along that trail, and especially right at Kohor Karfot, fitting the description for everything that Nephi and his family went through to find, and as their land bountiful before they built their boat and went. And that's why the people who are Heartland people, they make the argument that going around, to the east across the Pacific, it would just take too long. They didn't have enough provisions. But if you went around the west and you followed the coast, down the coast of Africa and up around and such, you could kind of stay near, get provisions and stuff, and then be blown into the Gulf of Mexico area and go around there. So, yeah, interesting side notes. So that's because he brought up Kohor Karfot. Lehi's separatist worship. Lehi's quick construction of his substitute altar after leaving Jerusalem has implications for understanding why he abandoned the city. In the decades before his flight and construction of temple substitutes, worship at the temple in Jerusalem had undergone sweeping change. I look at the camera knowingly. Both for better and for worse, the various types of reforms initiated by the young King Josiah snowballed until the reforms had altered sacrificial practices, e.g. forbidden families from performing their own, I think he means forbidding, families from performing their own Passover sacrifices, and rejected foreign idols and Israelite relics alike. So yeah, getting rid of foreign idols, great. Getting rid of Israelite relics, not so great. The Babylonian invasion continued this process when Nebuchadnezzar II subdued Jerusalem just prior to Lehi's departure. His forces plundered the temple and carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, leaving the temple desecrated and desacralized. That's 2 Kings 24:10-13. If by chance the ark and its relics survived this first siege, they would not have for long when the city fell again, and Nebuchadnezzar's forces demolished the temple and carried away the last of its treasure. That's 2 Kings 25:13-17. For the devout, the loss of a sacred presence, as central as that embodied by relics in the Ark of the Covenant, calls not only for mundane explanation, e.g. superior military force, but also for theological explanation. And the Book of Mormon provides a theology to explain the desacralization and abandonment of temples. In the published text, the Nephite prophet king, Benjamin, explains that a temple can be desacralized when it is polluted by persistent sin and thus rendered unholy. God then withdraws his protective presence from it and has no place there any longer, for he dwelleth not in unholy temples. That is Mosiah 2:36 through 37. Footnote about that. The divine spirit preserves the temple from destruction and is intimated by King Benjamin's analogy of the temple with the individual soul. The person who disobeys God loses the divine spirit that has preserved him or her. God has no place in this desecrated soul, just as he has no place in a desecrated temple. He dwelleth not in unholy temples. That soul's doom is therefore to be damned. That's Mosiah 2:36 through 39. Morals of the New Exodus. Memorials of the New Exodus. Beyond just the golden ark of the covenant and the stone tablets it held, the temple in Jerusalem held other sacred objects that served as memorials of the divine providence that had provided the Israelites aid during the Exodus. Similarly, along the journey to their new promised land, Lehi's band acquired objects that would serve as memorials of their own exodus. By the time they decided to construct a tabernacle, they had already come into possession of two such objects to remind them of this divine aid: the brass plates and the sword of Laban, which respectively corresponded to the law of Moses held in the ark, and the sword of Goliath that had been kept in the biblical tabernacle. That's 1 Samuel 21, 8 through 9. And I didn't know that was in there. Well, I need to go through the Old Testament, but my problem is that it's not quite condensed, but darn, I'll have to live with it. I need to go through the Old Testament again. Anyways, we're doing Doctrine and Covenants this year. Oh well. A third sacred relic that Lehi's family acquired on their exodus adds to our understanding of his tabernacle, referred to in the small plates as a ball, 1 Nephi 16, 10 through 30, or compass, 1 Nephi 18, 21, and also chapter 21, 2, or 1 Nephi chapter 18, verses 21. He repeats verse 21 twice. That might be a typo. And then 2 Nephi 5:12. So it's referred to as a ball or compass. And the Book of Mormon later provides a name for it when the prophet Alma II, I guess that's Alma the Second, Alma the Younger. Yeah, that's a subscript 2, so that's Alma the Younger. So, later provides a name for it when the prophet Alma the Second, Alma the Younger, tells his son Helaman about the thing which our fathers call a ball or director, or our fathers called it Liahona, which being interpreted a compass, and the Lord prepared it. That's Alma 37:38, indicating that the lost manuscript likely used this name as well. Discovering and operating the Liahona. After traveling some distance from Jerusalem, Lehi awoke one morning and opened the door of his tent to find the Liahona, a brass orb with two small rods or pins that acted as pointers lying on the ground. And it came, quote, "And it came to pass, my father arose in the morning and went forth to the tent door. To his great astonishment, he beheld upon the ground a round ball of curious workmanship, and it was of fine brass, and within the ball were two spindles, and the one pointed the way whither we should go into the wilderness." It's 1 Nephi 16:10. Although the small plates say that the pointers in this instrument directed Lehi's band where to go as they traveled through the wilderness and across the ocean, as well as where to find food and other necessities, that's verses 30 to 31, it provides only minimal description of how the Liahona operated. Quote, "I, Nephi, beheld the pointers which were in the ball, that they did work according to the faith and diligence and heed which we did give unto them. And there was also written upon them a new writing, which was plain to be read, which did give us understanding concerning the ways of the Lord. And it was written and changed from time to time, according to the faith and diligence which we gave unto it." That's 1 Nephi 16, 28 through 29. We do, however, get additional information on the Liahona from the recollections of Fayette Lapham and Francis Gladden Bishop, both of whom were likely told about content in the lost manuscript. As noted earlier in this chapter, Lapham reports that the Liahona had 2 pointers, one pointing steadily the way they should go, the other the way to where they could get provisions and other necessities. That's from Lapham's interview mentioned earlier. Bishop, likely being given information from Martin Harris, provides more detail. Quote, "The last of the sacred things to be named is a curious ball, but spoken of in the Book of Mormon and called directors, from the circumstance of there being in it 2 steel points, called spindles in the Book of Mormon, which points directed the inquirer by faith the proper course to take. This instrument is composed of a small brass ball about 3 inches in diameter." Okay, that's not big. "Having 2 steel points coming out of it in opposite directions. Around each of those points..." Whoa, okay, this is new stuff. "The instrument is composed of a brass ball about 3 inches in diameter, having 2 steel points coming out of it in opposite directions. Around each of these points are 12 squares, and between these 24 squares on the ball are figures of various descriptions representing various things on the earth, as vegetation, animals, running streams of water, etc." That's from Francis Gladden Bishop's An Address to the Sons and Daughters of Zion, Scattered Abroad Through All the Earth. For clarity of reading, I have removed Bishop's numerous italics, which served no evident purpose. Well, that's interesting. To me, that seems like, if I were to guess, since it's talking about spindles on each side, I would think that the spindles would be on the top and bottom, and that way you could spin it. But because to me, it's like, it almost sounds like the Mayan calendar, but on each side the spindle. So I don't know if it was meant to be on the sides, and then you had the 12 squares, and then the smaller squares in between. Is the calendar like that? That's 8. Wait a minute. 1, 2. Yeah, no, not the Mayan calendar, that's for sure. Huh. Okay, well, let's see what he has to say more for clarification. "While it is difficult to visualize the device precisely as Bishop intended, it is clear that on his model there were pictures around the spindles, so while one spindle pointed a direction, the other spindle could point to a picture. This detail, if correct, would help fill a gap in the published Book of Mormon's description of Liahona. Nephi says that within the ball were 2 spindles, and the one pointed the way whither we should go, into the wilderness, but he leaves the function of the second spindle unaccounted for. Lapham's report corrected this deficiency, indicating that the second spindle pointed the way where they could get provisions and other necessities. Bishop's account also indicates that the second spindle may have aided in finding provisions, but his description implies that the Liahona did so by pointing to a picture rather than pointing in a direction. A composite of all 3 descriptions suggests a possible model for how the Liahona worked. The first spindle mandated the direction of travel. The second spindle, by pointing one of the picture symbols around it, identified the purpose of travel. Together, the 2 spindles could show the Liahona's user where to go and what they would find when they got there. For an intriguing analysis of the Book of Mormon's Liahona passages from another angle that compares some of its described workings to that of an astrolabe, see Timothy Gervais and John L. Joyce, By Small Means, Rethinking the Liahona. Okay. It's an astrolabe. That's the ones where you point it up in the sky, right? Sorry, I'm going to look that up here real quick. Astrolabe. Get the images of an astrolabe. Ah, no, it's not what I was thinking. The astrolabe, I don't know if you can see this well, but there you go. That could make sense, but that's flat as a disc instead of a ball. But if it was similar, why would it need to be a ball? That's what I'm wondering. Like, is it that you had two, you had, that's just one that's really interesting to me. Like, there are so many ways in my mind I can just construct what a Liahona would look like. From something like a disc or an astrolabe, or like a modern compass where you just have two spindles, one that points to the picture, one that points to the direction, to one where it's a ball, but it just has like a case around it, like that you have a. But then where would the writing be? You know, you have just kind of like a compass face, but you have a ball-like structure over it. But what if it was just an actual ball, and then you had these spindles that were like at the top and bottom that would like you would have the like two rings. I don't know. Their descriptions are just there's so many ways I could write that with this information, or not write that, but the image in my mind I could make. After guiding the Lehi colonists to their new promised land, the Liahona passed through the line of Nephi's dynasty, perhaps so that future kings could consult it for divine guidance. Yet, curiously, by the time of Mormon's extant record of the Nephite kings, beginning with Benjamin, the device appears to have dropped from use, or at least to have left no further textual evidence for its use. Thus, when Alma the Younger, entrusts his son Helaman with the Nephite relics, he speaks of the Liahona only in terms of its past use by our fathers. Mosiah 1, 16 through 17, Alma 37, 1, 38 through 47. No longer functional as an instrument of divine power, the Liahona still served as a memorial or token of the divine guidance and substance given Lehi's family during their exodus. Which is also funny because, when I think of the Liahona and the ball, there's there are vestiges of the ideas of the temple and its garb in secular ceremonies, like particularly coronations of kings and queens in England. The robes that they put on, the crown that they put on, the scepter that they get, and the ball that they hold, which is parodied as the holy hand grenade, and kind of there are meanings behind all that. You're just like, that's close enough if you squint your eyes and turn your head a bit. So you see a bunch of these kind of old relics of vestiges of temple-like ceremonies in very specific and special things. So where for us it's like we get it because we go to the temple and we're trying to help families be together forever. So when I think of the holy hand grenade or the sacred ball during coronations, I'm like, I wonder if that was their kind of version of the Liahona. I know it's a bit of a stretch for that one, and the reason why is for them, if I remember right, their explanation of that is that it represents the world or the globe that they have power over to rule and reign, and that they should do so justly and that kind of stuff. But I mean, it's not. I don't know. Like I say, squint your eyes enough and turn your head, but you could do that with practically anything. But it's one of those things. The Liahona's role in the Lehi's exodus. The Liahona served as the central instrument of the divine power facilitating Lehi's exodus, combining the functions of several miraculous instruments and phenomenon of the biblical exodus that came to serve as memorials either kept before the Ark of the Covenant. That's Exodus 16:33 through 34, 1 Kings 8:9, 2 Chronicles 5:10, or actually in the ark, Hebrews 9:4. These were the pot of manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and for most of the Israelite nation's history, Moses' brazen serpent. That's Hebrews 9:4 and Exodus 16:33 through 34. Manna. In the biblical Exodus narrative, manna was the strange edible substance in the form of a ball that the Israelites found on the ground in the mornings. Quote, "In the mornings the dew lay around about the host, and when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness, there lay a small round thing. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, It is manna, for they wist not what it was. And Moses said unto them, This is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat." That's Exodus 16:13 through 14. The pot of manna in the tabernacle and the temple was thus a token of divine providence to the Israelites during their exodus. It was through manna they had been given sustenance. Aaron's rod that budded. This was a branch or staff used to settle the dispute over which tribes of Israel had right to act as priests in the tabernacle. Each tribe was to leave a staff with its name written on it overnight in front of the ark of the tabernacle. The tribe whose rod grew blossoms by the morning would be the one chosen by God as Israel's priests. Aaron's rod, representing the tribe of Levi, first brought forth buds, then bloomed blossoms, and finally yielded almonds. Numbers 17:8. Thus Aaron's rod was used to divine the will of God. The rod was afterward enshrined in front of the ark of the tabernacle, where it was to be kept as a token against the rebels, a perpetual sign that God had chosen the tribe of Levi to administer the priesthood. The brazen serpent. During the Exodus, the children of Israel began to complain. Despite their daily miraculous rations of manna, there is no bread, neither is there any water. In response, the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died. That's Numbers 21:4 through 6. After some pleading by Moses, God told him to construct a brass serpent to cure those who were bitten. And the Lord said unto Moses, Make thee a fiery serpent, and set it upon a pole. And it shall come to pass that every one that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and put it upon a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. That's verses 7 through 9 of Numbers 21, I believe. After its creation, the serpent pole was... and also, this is another funny thing, is that the guys from Ward Radio discussed temple imagery, and that the whole serpent thing, the reason why the serpent was beguiling to Eve was the idea that the serpent was being used, like in here, in the New Testament, they talk about how the brazen serpent is a type of Christ, because he was lifted up on a rod, and those who looked to it lived. I mean, heck, that's kind of why we still have that as the medical symbol. And so the idea of serpents being used as symbols for good as well as bad go back to the Garden of Eden, because what if the idea was that the serpent was originally a divine symbol, but that then Satan was just trying to trick Eve and them by showing up as an angel of light, saying, "See, everything's fine. It's okay. You can eat this fruit because I want to get my plan in and show God what's what, that it would be much better if people didn't have any agency." It's just... And then it makes more sense, because if it's a flying serpent, the casting down of Satan is that they're like ripping off his wings and saying, you don't get to be divine. You don't get this divine symbolism anymore. You get to be the ground snake. You get to be the one that crawls on its belly. And when they were casting him down, it's invoking the images of them ripping off his wings, that kind of stuff. That was a really cool discussion on Ward Radio. Anyways, So back to the brazen serpent. After its creation, the serpent pole was preserved among Israel's tabernacle and temple relics for several centuries until it was destroyed by Hezekiah as part of his reformist goals to eliminate idolatry from Israel. So they ripped down those posts that had the symbols of the snakes, or that may have alluded to the Garden of Eden and other divine symbols. After its creation, the serpent pole was preserved. Hezekiah reformist goals eliminate idolatry. 2 Kings 18:4, called Nehushtan by Hezekiah. The brazen serpent may have functioned as more than just a memorial of the Exodus. The name is often thought to have been coined by Hezekiah as a dismissive reference to the relic as a mere thing of brass. However, the name likely signifies more than this by evoking an earlier root, nehash, Hebrew for snake, that also functions as a verb meaning to divine. This would indicate that the brass snake in Solomon's temple was possibly employed in some way as an instrument for divining the will of God. See? You can get this information from Shana Delansky, A Goddess in the Garden, The Fall of Eve. Exactly where in Solomon's temple this pole was kept is not specified, or it was removed because of the Deuteronomists. The Proto-Israelite temple at Hazor, built on a parallel plan to Solomon's temple, enshrined in a bronze serpent in its Holy of Holies. Footnote, two bronze serpents have been excavated in the Holy of Holies of the Hazor temple, one from stratum 1b, which dated to 1400 to 1300 BCE, the other from stratum 1a, dated to 1300 to 1200 BCE. See the cult book of Massier Munich, the cult of the bronze serpents in ancient Canaan and Israel. This is Garden of Eve symbolism. Sorry. So let me reread the paragraph up to that point. Exactly where in Solomon's temple the pole was kept is not satisfied. The Proto-Israelite temple at Hazor, built on the parallel plan to Solomon's temple, enshrined a bronze serpent in its Holy of Holies. Because the other Exodus memorials of Solomon's temple were in the Holy of Holies, either in or near the ark, it seems likely that the serpent pole was also enshrined there. Footnote says the Nehushtan could have been kept within, atop, or beside the ark. I'm reading to Dad. I cannot pause this.
It's an important question, though.
Okay, what's your important question that you're going to have over the entire internet?
What if there was a reason that the 116 pages were lost?
There is a reason. It's because someone didn't keep their covenants. Joseph Smith asked God if Martin could take the manuscript 3 times. Twice, God said no. Okay? Joseph Smith felt extremely responsible because he didn't listen to him twice. The 3rd time, God said, fine, but if you do this, there are only 5 people Martin Harris can show it to. Okay? And here are the specific people. His wife, his daughter, and it was listed off. He didn't keep to that. He showed it to a lot more than just 5 people. So yeah, there was a reason it was lost. But that's why the small plates of Nephi were prepared. This book goes into all the reasons why it was likely 300 pages, 200 to 300 pages worth of text, not just 116. The 116 comes from the idea that, well, the portion of the small plates of Nephi that replaced everything that was lost before was 116 pages. So they're just like, it's 116 because of that number. Was it actually that number? No, probably not. And he gives really good reasons why. So when you look at our Book of Mormon today, just remember, we're probably missing about half of it. Cool? All right.
Sorry.
No problem. Just come listen while I finish reading to Dad. Rather than just being a mere analog to the Israelite temple relics, the Liahona served parallel functions to each of the three miraculous instruments of the Exodus. First, the Liahona provided sustenance. Just as manna had been divine means of providing sustenance to the Israelites in the wilderness, the Liahona was the divine means of providing it to the Lehites, though through it Lehi and Nephi could access the will of God and be led to their sustenance in the wilderness, making the connection between the Liahona and pot of manna even stronger. The language Nephi uses to describe the discovery of the Liahona directly evokes the Hebrew Bible's description of the Israelites discovering manna. Quote, "And it came to pass that even as the quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning the dew lay round about the host, and when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing." And comparing that was the Exodus account, comparing that to the first Nephi account, "And it came to pass that my father arose in the morning, and went forth to the tent door. To his great astonishment, he beheld upon the ground a round ball of curious workmanship." So, second, the Liahona served as a revelatory or divinatory function, with its pointers supernaturally pointing directions similar to a way divining rods are used, and echoing the divination used of Aaron's rod, as suggesting by Hugh Nibley. The pointing of the rods or pins in the Liahona also constitutes a form of rod divination. See, Hugh Nibley discussed the Liahona in the context of rod or arrow divination in Hugh Nibley's Since Cumorah. While Aaron's rod divined the will of God by budding leaves, the connection between it and the traditional divining rods made clear by Joseph Smith's revelations identifying Oliver Cowdery's use of a rod or the gift of working with the rod, the gift of Aaron. The phrase, "the gift of working with the rod," is used in the first printing of the Revelation of the Book of Commandments in 1833. The earliest version of the Revelation referred to the rod as a spout. That's Revelation of April 1829b, or Doctrine and Covenants 8. Third, the Liahona, like the Nehushtan, or brazen serpent, served as an instrument of deliverance. This parallel is implicit in the narrative of Lehi's Exodus in the teachings of the Book of Mormon prophets, particularly Alma the Younger, Alma too, who used identical language to describe both the brazen serpent and the Liahona. During his ministry, Alma preached to the Zoramites regarding the use of the brazen serpent in Moses' Exodus. "A type was raised up in the wilderness, that whosoever would look upon it might live. And many did look and live," Alma 33:19. Shortly afterward, Alma the Younger echoed his words about the brazen serpent in the words about the use of the Liahona in Lehi's Exodus. "It prepared for them that if they would look, they might live," Alma 37:46. Thus, again, we see how the Liahona played yet another parallel role to the miraculous instruments of the Exodus. The Liahona and the Tabernacle. According to Fayette Lapham, Lehi and family were directed to stop and erect a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire whenever they became bewildered or at a loss what to do, after which they were guided through the wilderness by the ball, having two pointers, one pointing steadily the way they should go, the other the way to where they could get provisions and other necessities. That was from our former interview. This account connects the Liahona and Lehi's tabernacle in multiple ways. First, it connects them temporally, placing the finding of the Liahona in the narrative immediately after the erection of Lehi's tabernacle. Interesting. Placing the finding of the Liahona after the tabernacle erection. Interesting. And then second, it connects them functionally. According to Lapham, Lehi's tabernacle was a place to go and inquire whenever they became bewildered or at a loss of what to do. And the Liahona, a means by which to inquire. Thus, the tabernacle was the most natural place to use the Liahona. Third, true to the larger pattern of Lehi's Exodus, mirroring the biblical Exodus, the Liahona is related to Lehi's tabernacle in the same way that the biblical Urim and Thummim is related to Moses' tabernacle. During this time, the Liahona served as Lehi's stand-in for the Urim and Thummim, and its discovery is connected to the construction of his tabernacle. In a similar way, the Urim and Thummim are first mentioned just after and in connection with the commandments to build the Israelite tabernacle. That's Exodus 25:9 and chapter 28:30 and verse 43. And they first physically appear in the narrative within the tabernacle at Aaron's consecration as a high priest, Leviticus 8:3-8. Likewise, just as the Liahona was an instrument by which the Lehites inquired of God, so too was the Urim and Thummim the instrument by which the Israelites inquired of God, each in their respective tabernacles. By doing so, Lehi stepped into the shoes of the high priest, signaling his rejection and purposeful replacement, not only of a desecrated Jerusalem temple, but also of a corrupt Aaronite priestly class. Fourth, Nephi's description of the Liahona as being of curious workmanship and of fine brass, 1 Nephi 16:10, utilizes a term tied to the construction of Israelites' tabernacle. The word curious appears 9 times in the King James translation of the Hebrew Bible. One use broadly describes curious works in gold and in silver and in brass that would adorn the tabernacle. That's Exodus 35:32. And the other 8 uses all describe the curious girdle of the ephod that would be worn by the high priest when performing his sacred duties in the tabernacle. That's Exodus 28:8, and also verses 27-28, chapter 29:5, chapter 39:5, chapter 39, 20-21, and Levi 8:7. Fifth, Lehi's finding of the Liahona echoes Moses' inauguration of the tabernacle. When describing Lehi's discovery of the Liahona, Nephi writes, "As my father arose in the morning and went forth to the tent door, to his great astonishment he beheld upon the ground a round ball of curious workmanship." Like Nephi's use of curious, his reference to Lehi finding it at the tent door again connects his narrative to that of the tabernacle. While this may initially seem to just be simply referring to Lehi rising and finding the Liahona upon opening the door of his personal tent, the specific phrasing may point to this being the door of Lehi's tabernacle. Reference to the doors of tents may be found in several narratives of the King James Bible. However, the specific phrase tent door is found in only 2, both of which describe theophanic encounters with God. The first is when the Lord appeared unto Abraham in the plains of Mamre as he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. That's Genesis 18:1. And the second occurs during Moses' inauguration of the tabernacle. And it came to pass that every one which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle, and stood every man at his tent door, and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. And came to pass, as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle. And the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door. And all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door. And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. Exodus 33:7-10. In this terse, extant form, the narrative of Lehi finding the Liahona evokes this Exodus narrative, just as the Israelites' pillar of cloud that would lead them the way, Exodus 13:21, appeared at the door of Moses' tabernacle. So too does the Lehites' Liahona, which Nephi said led us and pointed the way, appear at the door of Lehi's tabernacle. That the use of the phrase tent door in the Liahona story is an intentional rather than accidental echo of the tabernacle story is suggested by the Book of Mormon echoes of the narrative of the Israelite Israelites pitching their tents around the tabernacle during its own narrative of King Benjamin's sermon. When Benjamin addressed his people from a tower erected by the temple, the people pitched their tents round about the temple, every man having his tent with the door thereof toward the temple, that thereby they might remain in their tents and hear the words which King Benjamin should speak unto them. That's Mosiah 2:6. Lapham's account of Lehi acquiring the Liahona in conjunction with the building of a tabernacle not only fits elegantly into the extant Lehi story, it also has both biblical Exodus models and later Book of Mormon Exodus echoes. This account illuminates how Lehi used the Lehi. So, let me reread that. This account illuminates how Lehi used the Liahona and how he began reconstructing temple worship as it had previously existed in the Jerusalem temple. The narrative of Lehi building a tabernacle, acquiring the Liahona, and consulting the Liahona in his tabernacle belongs with the rest of the Lehi saga. The whole narrative of the Liahona, how it was found like the manna, filled with functions of sacred instruments of biblical Exodus, was used in the tabernacle and was preserved like the memorials of the biblical Exodus, helped give the Nephites an origin story like that of the biblical Israelite nation, and laid the foundation for the Nephites to restore or reconstruct temple worship like what had been practiced in Solomon's temple. Wandering in the wilderness. This is the last section. In both the biblical and Book of Mormon Exodus, the people pitched their tabernacle at various encampments. They were led to... I keep splicing these sentences. Let me try that again. In both the biblical and Book of Mormon Exodus, the people pitched their tabernacle at various encampments they were led to along their journey. However, despite their divine guidance, both groups moved toward their respective promised lands with painful sluggishness. The Israelites wandered 40 years to traverse the distance between Egypt and Palestine. The Lehites made better time, yet they still managed to take 8 years to go from Jerusalem to the bottom of the Arabian Peninsula at a pace of about 5 miles per week. Based on... It makes me wonder if what likely happened is that they would camp, they would get provisions, and so it was like, we move only every couple of days, and maybe it's like 15 miles, but it's like we stay 1 week at a time along the coast. Anyways. Don't know. But that averages 5 miles per week. Based on Nephi's description of Lehi's record and Nephi's own large plates, sources behind the lost manuscript, that manuscript would have detailed the more part of all our proceedings in the wilderness. That's 1 Nephi 19:2. And a footnote says, John Tvetnes first suggested that the lost manuscript might detail Lehi's wandering in the wilderness. In John A. Tvetnes's book, The Most Correct Book, Insights from a Book of Mormon Scholar. Such narrative detailing the Lehi colony's slow progress is missing from the extant Book of Mormon account of Lehi's journey. However, the cause of their sluggishness was given in the earliest part of Book of Mormon's manuscript Joseph Smith dictated after resuming his translation, beginning with the Book of Mosiah. Quote, and moreover, King Benjamin also gave Mosiah II charge concerning the ball or director which led our fathers through the wilderness, which was prepared by the hand of the Lord, that thereby they might be led, every one according to the heed and diligence which they gave unto him. So, therefore, as they were unfaithful, they did not prosper nor progress in their journey, but were driven back, and incurred the displeasure of God upon them. And therefore they were smitten with famine and sore afflictions, to stir them up in remembrance of their duty. Mosiah 1:16-17. Lehi's band failed to progress in their journey when they failed to give heed and diligence to God. In particular, Alma II tells us that Lehites failed to progress due to the Liahona ceasing to work when their faith and diligence waned. Quote, "And behold, the Liahona was prepared to show unto our fathers the course which they should travel in the wilderness, and it did work for them according to their faith in God. Therefore, if they had faith to believe that God could cause that those spindles should point the way they should go, behold, it was done. Nevertheless, they were slothful, and forgot to exercise their faith and diligence. And then those marvelous works ceased, and they did not progress in their journey. Therefore they tarried in the wilderness, or did not travel a direct course, and were afflicted with hunger and thirst because of their transgressions." Alma 7:38 through 24. The stories hinted at here of Lehi, the Lehi colonists being afflicted and driven back, are, for the time being, largely unavailable. However, the published Book of Mormon does offer one instance in which either the Liahona failed to provide the needed guidance, or Lehi failed to diligently consult it. After traveling for many days, the group found themselves without food and with Nephi's bow broken, causing the brothers and even the father to despair. It was at this point when Nephi demonstrated his faith by constructing a new bow and sling and asking his father for guidance, that Lehi humbled himself and did inquire of the Lord. Lehi was then told by the voice of the Lord, "Look upon the ball." Nephi writes, "And it came to pass that I, Nephi, beheld the pointers which were in the ball, and that they did work according to the faith and diligence and heed." See, that's the other thing, is he says the spindles were in the ball. So, like I say, there's so many times where it feels like that Liahona would be akin to a compass, but with two different rings of symbols around it, one for the direction, and then the other for, like, the food and other guidance and such. Anyways. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, beheld the pointers which were in the ball, that they did work according to the faith and diligence and heed which we did give unto them. And it came to pass that I, Nephi, did go forth into the top of the mountain according to the directions which were given upon the ball. And it came to pass that I did slay wild beasts, insomuch that I did obtain food for our families. Despite not being the eldest son, Nephi's successful use of the instrument bolstered his right to possess it after his father's death. The incident again also creates a parallel between Lehi and his family to the biblical Jacob and his family. In the Genesis narrative of Jacob and his sons, during an extended period of hunger, there was one son who saved the entire family from starvation, Joseph. That's Genesis chapter 41 through 46. In saving his own family, Nephi stepped into the forebearers' shoes. The Lehites' journey into the Promised Land continued to echo the Israelite wandering in the wilderness, even while they crossed the ocean. And Nephi, for his part, continued to take the role of the family's Joseph. In the new Promised Land, Lehi would take up the roles of Jacob and Moses once more, blessing his family and dividing them into tribes as Jacob had, and giving them a valedictory model on that of Moses and that of Moses in Deuteronomy. And as Lehi's part in the new Israel's sacred drama ended, Nephi took on a new role in leading the work of resettlement. The next chapter is the 7 tribes of Lehi. So it looks like this chapter was all mainly about the Liahona. And like I say, it's weird to me that it's a ball, and yet there's spindles, and he talks about the spindles in the ball. And so that gives me that idea of, you have a half a hemisphere with with spindles inside, like a compass, pointing to images to lead the way, and then kind of like a covering over it. But I don't know. There are other times where it doesn't sound like it should be like that at all. Either way, the whole point of the chapter was explaining how it was all specifically to point to the idea that, I just did not think, and I did not know that Lehi would have built, but it makes sense. I mean, how else was he offering sacrifices? He built his own tabernacle, and because he built his own tabernacle, he was able to inquire of the Lord and make the sacrifices and keep the law of Moses, and then that the Liahona was part of the relics that would have been important. So you had Laban's sword, which doubled as Goliath's sword. You had the brass plates, which would have been the law, and then you had the Liahona, which is in many ways the Nahashtim. Oh god, I keep forgetting that really cool name. Nahashtim, this brass serpent. Nehushtan, the Nehushtan. So, and what's really funny is, like, again, one of the guys who wrote In the Language of Adam, he really goes into what the Nehushtan and everything like that was about, and more about all the divine family symbology in the temple. And so he really goes, the guy who wrote the book In the Language of Adam really goes on about the Nehushtan and how they were important and how they were serpents with wings. And he was the one who talked about that the throwing down of Satan is the idea of you have this symbol of a serpent with wings, and that the reason why he's going to be crawling on his belly is the idea is that not only did he go into the Garden of Eden as if he was a divine being to deceive Eve, that they were ripping off his wings and showing that, no, you don't get to, because you were seriously just trying to screw things up. You came down here to, sure, you may try and hide behind the idea that you were trying to get the ball rolling like every other place, but you were doing it so that you could try and overthrow God and show that your plan's better than his when it's not. And so we're going to rip off your divinity, symbols of divinity, and your ability to... I wonder if that's what it means to be thrown down. That if wings are representative symbolically of mobility, of imagine going between heaven and earth, and the fact that, when they talk about, like, Jesus Christ ascending into heaven and descending from heaven, he's going up and down through the sky. Well, how does anything go through the sky? It comes by wings. Obviously, he didn't have wings, but that's where we get the symbol. And then you have the snake symbolism always... a lot of people are weirded out by that because they associate snakes with Satan because of the Garden of Eden story. But at the same time, it's the idea of it's a symbol of renewal because they shed their skin and they grow and become better, and they shed their skin and they grow and become better. And so, to me, I understand the symbolism behind snakes being a possible, divine symbol, meaning that, hey, we all want to become better. And so we have to shed our old selves, and some people speculate that the skins in the Garden of Eden were snake skins. I don't know about that. That's not a bad conjecture. I don't have anything to support it other than, again, these guys who dive deep into this apocryphal writing and ancient texts and the knowledge of their Hebrew and Greek and everything like that. And I'm like, oh, okay. Cool, that's a neat detail. So, again, I can't remember if it was the guy who wrote In the Language of Adam or Jonah Barnes that they posited the idea that the skin spoken of in the Garden of Eden could have been representative of snake skin. But, again, because it's drawing on the parallel of the divine symbol of a snake representing the idea of shedding off your old self and being reborn. And then the importance of it being in the Holy of Holies, the Nehushtan, the two snakes, is the idea of the good Nehushtan and the bad Nehushtan. And it comes back to temple symbology of the idea of we start in the Garden of Eden, we are exiled from the Garden of Eden, and we try to return back to a better Garden of Eden, essentially, the presence of God. Because if you think of the Garden of Eden as originally being in God's presence, of living with him and being innocent and having no knowledge, and then it's like, oh, okay, you now have knowledge, so you get to choose, come on down and live your life and pick how you're going to be, and then if you do well enough and you believe in Jesus Christ, who's going to save you, then you can return to our presence and enjoy the same benefits as us. And so yeah, there's also, dude, the guy who wrote In the Language of Adam, and he goes on about the Nehushtan and the symbolism of the Garden of Eden and the idea of Lehi's vision, that being Lehi's vision that Nephi shares in the Tree of Life, is all temple symbolism. And he talks about that in some of his word radio appearances, and just cool stuff. Like the idea that why Nephi mentions that though I was young, I was large in stature. Why would he mention that, right? Because he was taught in the ways of his father, probably meaning that he was taught about the temple, and that it's likely that in the old temple practices that when it talked about, either things being tempted, if you were being tempted, if you were being, basically, he's alluding to the idea of lost parts of the temple ceremony where it's like, okay, if you're going to be, you can't tell these things to other people because they're sacred. And so even if they try and beat it out of you, that you can't give it to them. And so we're going to do a ritualistic beating of you, so that way you know what it's like and you can learn to say no in the temple setting. So that way if someone's trying to get this sacred information out of you, it doesn't happen. So he alludes to the idea that Nephi tells that I was big and I was taught in the way of my father, and it's likely that, there was perhaps parts of that, because he reconstructs it from other things that show the idea of ritual, the kind of ritualistic beatings to say, you're not going to give in, even if it's this hard, that kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. And he goes on to talk about how the tree of life vision in there is all about the temple again, because, the tree of life being, showing you have Mary, the mother of God, and Jesus Christ, and being the fruit of it. And so the divine maternal idea of a tree symbology, and that being part of the whole heavenly family kind of ideas. So yeah, the Language of Adam is one of the books that I'm like looking forward to, because I love symbolism, but it's interesting to finally see all this information just falling into my lap after so many years, finally, just because I started looking things up, and how cool it is that there is so much that's out there that just it solidifies your testimony of things, it solidifies your better understanding of things. But most of all, like, a lot of this symbolism, all this, whether you want to view snakes as a divine symbol or a devil symbol, whether you want to view symbols of the tree of life as divine maternity, or the tree of life as specifically only the family tree, or, that's the thing with symbolism, is that you can view it in so many different ways. The ultimate idea, all of this is just to, there's going to be different ways that you're going to get something in your mind going, oh, that's cool, and oh, this is what it means. It's going to hit people differently. Some people, no, they just need pure literalism. Just give it to me straight. And there are other people that are like, wow, when you think of these symbols in this way, well, that's way cool. Because, like, from a women's perspective, because they had women's of ward radio, they were talking about the tree of life, and a lot of them are, they're in the time of their lives where they're mothers, or still being mothers, and so their conversation on ward radio was talking about how sometimes what is it? Not matrons. What are the women that help other women give birth? Midwife. There we are. In midwifery, sometimes the placenta is called the tree of life because of the placenta is the organ that's along with the baby that's attached to the umbilical cord. Well, how the umbilical cord attaches into the placenta, it kind of splits and everything like that. And if you look at it right, it kind of looks like a tree. And so they were talking about different symbols about the tree of life being, connecting with birth and other stuff like that. And that's what I'm like, what's fascinating is that just from how the parables were taught with Jesus's time, that the parables are meant to be different levels according to your understanding. And so if your understanding is as a midwife, and your immediate thought of the tree of life is like how you're sustained inside the mother before you're born, and that it's kind of a part of you, and that we are taken from it afterwards, and that when we're trying to return to God, we're trying to return to that type of continued life afterwards, or other things like that. That's the wonder of symbolism, is it speaks to where you are at in the way that you need at that time. And so that's why I'm always just pleased with the looking into all the understanding and symbolism, and especially when it means something who's trying to communicate something to someone. So the idea of Nephi is writing down, hey, look, this is a parable, if you're smart enough to see it, that we are having an exodus from Jerusalem to our personal promised land. And that, Laban was a representative of the old way and a representative of Egypt and representative of our captivity, because he tried to capture and kill us. And so him being killed establishes me as going to be the new Nephite king. And here we have Lehi, the father, building the tabernacle, inquiring of God in the tabernacle, doing everything as religiously as possible, and following the Liahona. To me, the importance of it in this context is not just that symbolism is cool and it means something to me and I like Jesus Christ better. It's to me like, no, this meant something to Nephi and Lehi and Elma and Helaman and all of them after, and it is steeped in this language of symbolism for a purpose. And it's in the same way that I think God will not stop doing that, mainly because it's like the more symbols he can layer on there, the more he can hopefully slap people upside the head when it finally hits them that, like the whole idea that Joseph Smith getting the plates on certain dates that coincide with the Jewish festivals, that translating the plates coincides with Passover, that Elijah coming is also at Passover. It's just big things happen in spring, and it's probably there for a reason. And so why in the world would God stop doing that when it's another way he can slap us upside the head and say, see, do you get it now? And so that way it's more cool to the people who are like, wow, and it can be used to help those who are like, huh, what's going on? Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, maybe I should pay attention. So anyways, next is going to be about the 7 tribes of Lehi, so splitting them up into tribes. We're cruising through this. We are, it's halfway according to the thickness, but it's actually more than halfway simply because there is this much. This is the bibliography. So we're well on our way. Love you, Pa. We'll see you.